Speaker is Sarah Scheffler. And Sarah, you're a PhD student at Boston University, and you are on board with sharing your screen, which is fabulous. And the title of Sarah's paper is A Cryptographic View of Foregone Conclusions in Compelled Self-Incrimination. And so,
yeah.
And so, oh, let's see, but it's slightly different actually.
I forgot I changed the title. I meant to change the title on these slides to match the title that I gave you, but I forgot. So
no worries.
Get the
no worries.
Title.
So the talk now is protecting cryptography against compelled self-incrimination, and I see that you're giving this paper also together with Maya and Claudia from Boston University as well. So I'll keep an eye on time and go for it, Sarah. Thank you so much.
All right, sweet, thanks. So yeah, as per the introduction, I'm a fifth-year PhD student in computer science. I study cryptography at Boston University with Maya and Claudia, who's my advisor. So my specific topic for today is compelled decryption in the United States. So this is when a court orders somebody to decrypt their own device. But also more generally, since this is an interdisciplinary workshop, and since this is a very heavily joint computer science and law work, I'm also going to talk a bit about just the process that we had doing this and sort of the more meta aspects of how we did this. So this is a timely topic in the US. So Ross, in a very excellent keynote, discussed several aspects of these sorts of, I guess I'll call them fights between various, governmental and non-governmental entities over the last, several decades, from key-length arguments all the way up to end-to-end encrypted chat. So these days, at least in the US, and I assume also in Europe, another facet of these arguments is compelled decryption. So this is courts ordering people to decrypt their devices, since the courts or the specific law enforcement agency usually doesn't have the power to break encryption themselves, at least not for these sort of small potatoes sorts of cases. So a few months ago, a petition was filed to bring Andrews v. State of New Jersey to the Supreme Court. So there was this gentleman named Andrews. He had an encrypted device. He was directed to reveal the passcodes necessary to decrypt the device to the courts, or else face contempt of court. Andrews pled the Fifth and claimed that complying with this order would violate his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and I'll get into that. This case hasn't really progressed that much since January. The courts are slow. But importantly, this case is not anywhere close to unique. So there were a whole host of these cases in the lower courts. Their decisions are all over the map. Most of these actually ask a slightly different question, which is whether you can be forced to enter your password or just even provide the decrypted content to the device rather than reveal the passcode itself. So that's what I'm going to focus on talking about. What we did was we used cryptography. We did sort of a cryptographic analysis to investigate what the law says about these kinds of compelled actions, right? So this is sort of part of this. I should move this. This is part of this two-way interplay between law and cryptography. So we want this two-way street. So right, one, what are the legal implications of using cryptography? And then two, how can we use cryptography to understand the law? So in the context of this compelled decryption question, we answered sort of the second question first. So we modeled the doctrine that's used to compel decryption using a concept from cryptography that I'm sure you're all very familiar with now, this real ideal paradigm. And then we use that model to understand whether or not somebody can be compelled by the courts to decrypt their device. This exact model is only going to apply in the US, but the way we approached this should also apply to analyzing other countries or organizations' laws. Okay, so into the real topic. So we're imagining this compelled decryption scenario as an interactive protocol. So the government orders a respondent to decrypt a phone or some device. In the US, the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution says that no person shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. So the respondent, so-called, pleads the Fifth and says that the decryption order violates her rights. But there's a limit to this Fifth Amendment. So the privilege against self-incrimination only extends to certain actions. So the government then has to provide a rationale as to why you should be forced to decrypt anyway. When would the respondent be protected under the Fifth Amendment? When should she not be forced to decrypt? So this Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination extends to actions that are all three of compelled, incriminating, and testimonial. So if you're saying a statement that is all three of compelled, incriminating, testimonial, you don't have to say it. So the Fifth Amendment says. So the first two are relatively self-explanatory. Compelled just means the government made you say it. You didn't confess of your own accord earlier. Incriminating just means this is the, quote, link in a chain of evidence that could convict you of a crime. And testimonial is more complicated. So something's testimonial, roughly speaking, if it reveals the contents of your mind. So the first way an action might be testimony is if the output of the action directly reveals the contents of your mind. So if you're forced to write down how you committed a crime, that's pure testimony, and that's almost always covered by the Fifth Amendment. Additionally, an action can be protected even if the output isn't testimonial, but it's possible to infer something about your beliefs based on how you perform the action. So for instance, if the government subpoenas you to produce a gun if you have one, your response to the subpoena is going to implicitly testify as to whether or not you have a gun. So that implicit testimony is still protected under the Fifth Amendment. But there's a third layer of subtlety, which is that the government can compel an action anyway if the implicit testimonial aspects are a foregone conclusion, meaning they add little or nothing to the government's existing knowledge. So in my gun example, if the government already knew you had a gun and knew a couple of other specifics, now they could likely subpoena you to produce it. That's likely no longer protected under the Fifth Amendment, because even though that action has some implicit testimony, namely whether or not you have a gun, it's implicit testimony that the government already knew. So this last part is called the Foregone Conclusion Doctrine. It originated in the context of forcing people to comply with subpoenas for paper documents that the government already knew about, and now it's being used to compel decryption. So importantly, the contents of any documents that are provided are usually not protected by the Fifth Amendment, typically because they are not compelled by the government. Like if the government compels you to bring a train ticket or something, the train ticket contents themselves, first of all, they're not testimonial because you didn't write them, and second of all, they're not compelled because the government didn't force you to get the train ticket. So typically the contents are not protected, but your act of producing the train ticket to the government is protected. So how can we go about answering this question? This is a challenge even in single disciplinary work, but I think it's harder in these sort of fuzzy interdisciplinary areas. So this is a Loney Cohen slide, so thanks to him. So the process we went through is basically first we ask, okay, what are the legal questions here? What are the relevant laws? How does the problem relate to others in that law? And then we try to turn our technical expertise to the problem. So we formalize a version of the question we're trying to answer. We try to convert this legal question into a technical question. And then we use that technical definition to analyze the problem we were originally looking at, and hopefully use that to draw conclusions about our question. So in this context, our key observation was that the idea of something adding little or nothing to the government's information, this foregone conclusion idea, is very similar to simulation in cryptography, so the real ideal paradigm in cryptography. So if I've heard people here say real ideal, so I guess I assume you know what that is, but I'm not sure if the word simulation is as broadly used. So this is a different sort of simulation than the normal use of the term. So in cryptography, a simulator is sort of determining what is learned by a party executing a protocol. So we suppose Alice is interacting with Bob using a protocol where Alice is not supposed to learn anything new. Learn anything new, what does that all mean? How can we be sure that Alice doesn't learn anything new? The idea is that if Alice didn't actually learn any new information, then she didn't have to interact with Bob at all in order to sort of do a similar interaction. She could have just simulated the whole interaction herself. So we build this simulator, which I represent by this purple box. And if the simulator's result is computationally indistinguishable, meaning it just looks very similar, nobody can tell the difference from the transcript of the protocol with Bob, then Alice didn't learn anything new by running the protocol. So what we're going to do to model this foregone conclusion doctrine is we're going to require the government to make a simulator, like a crypto simulator, to simulate the compelled action. And we do this in a way that the government needs to simulate the testimonial aspects of the action, but not the non-testimonial parts of the action, like the contents of the device. Okay, so I'm very briefly going to try to explain this model. I think when I was planning this, I thought I had 15 minutes, so I'll go really fast. So we have two parties plus a judge. We have a respondent that claims if I do this action, something new about the contents of my mind will be added to the government's knowledge. So it should not be a foregone conclusion. And the government claims that no, I actually already know all the testimony inherent in this action. I won't learn anything new by you doing this action. And the judge is supposed to determine who's right. So the idea here is that if the government is right, that the act of production did not rely on the contents of the respondent's mind, then they ought to be able to build a simulator that can return something very similar to the compelled action using every single resource in the entire world except the contents of the respondent's mind. So we split the world into two parts. We split world into the respondent's mind and just nature, which is just a really big list of every single other thing in the world. We let the compelled action query both parts of the world, but we let the simulator only query nature. I'm going to try to take like 1 or 2 more minutes here. I hope that's okay. So I guess in my gun example, here, I'll even skip this. In my gun example, if the government knows that the respondent has 1 gun in her house, the government could simulate this compelled action. The compelled action is, go bring me the gun from your house. The government can simulate this by searching the house to get the gun. It doesn't have to do this in real life. It just has to show that it has enough evidence that that's the only possible outcome. It's a foregone conclusion that whatever this action is, it will result in something that we kind of already expect. And we think that sort of matches the compelling production of paper documents sense that this doctrine originated in. The sort of way this would not go the same way is, okay, let's suppose the respondent tries to lie and say she doesn't have a gun. Well, the government has this evidence that shows the respondent is lying. So even though in the world where the respondent doesn't have a gun, the search of the house would fail, it doesn't matter because the government knows we're not in that world. If the government had no evidence, then it would have to simulate every single possible world that was allowed by the evidence, including the world where the respondent doesn't have a gun. Because if this action were compelled, the government would have learned something from this. The government would have learned, the respondent has a gun, or the respondent doesn't have a gun. This is not something that it knew in advance. And so this was information sort of in R's mind that it didn't have before, that it has now learned. So this is the general way we tried to answer this question with this model. We are trying to show basically that this compelled action is a foregone conclusion if, for all settings of the world allowed by the evidence, we can't tell the difference between the real compelled action and the ideal simulated action that the government takes. I'll say one very quick thing right before the end here, which is just that the hardest challenge in all of these kinds of works is finding the right definition. So we keyed in on this one phrase, adds little or nothing to the government's existing information. We could have keyed in on a different phrase, which was the compelled action needs to not rely on the truth-telling of the respondent. And that would have led to a slightly different definition, where all the sort of existing cases that we can use as a test to see whether our definition is good live in the center of these two definitions where they would meet both. But now they have slightly different impacts on these new cryptographic things that are being compelled under this doctrine. So we have to kind of go back to more first principles reasons why, no, actually, like I will argue later that I think the blue definition really is the better definition than the pink definition. But nothing that's already been done has shown us that, so we have to go back and argue this for philosophical reasons and law reasons rather than technical reasons of adhering to the cases that we checked. Okay, that's all I'll say. Thank you. I think I've already gone over time. Thanks for that. So here's a couple of links if you would like to see more, and I'm always happy to talk about this after. Thank you.